In 1873, on the wind-scraped edges of Piedmont Springs, Wyoming territory, a widow named Nora Callahan woke to find a wild foal staring at her through the fence. What started as a strange morning visit turned into something she couldn't explain, something that would break her heart wide open and put it back together again. Before we dive into the story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more heartwarming stories tomorrow. Also, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's continue with the story. Nora Callahan stepped onto her porch as dawn broke over the Laramie Range, coffee tin in hand, and stopped cold. A foal stood at her fence line, small and scrawny, its buckskin coat dull in the early light. It watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Wild horses passed through her land all the time, but they never lingered. They certainly never stared. She ignored it, walked to the well, pumped water into the trough for her own horses. When she turned around, the foal had moved. It stood closer now, just beyond the gate, head lowered, but eyes fixed on her every movement. 8 months since Isaac died. 8 months of running this ranch alone, and now she had a wild animal treating her property like a waiting room. Nora threw a rock near its hooves, not at it, but close enough to send a message. The foal jumped back 5 steps, then stopped. Didn't run, just repositioned itself and kept watching. She cursed under her breath, grabbed the axe, and headed to the woodpile. Splitting logs usually cleared her head, gave her hands something to do besides shaking. An hour later, she looked up from a half-cord of firewood. The foal stood 20 feet away, sides heaving, ribs showing through its coat like fingers pressing against fabric. It had followed her. She could see its front left leg now, how it favored the right, barely putting weight down. At noon, she rode out to check the fence line along the eastern pasture. The foal trailed behind her mare, struggling to keep pace, limping worse now, but refusing to stop. When Nora dismounted to hammer a loose post back into the hard ground, the foal stopped too. Stood there, breathing hard, waiting for her to move again. What kind of wild thing acts like this, she thought. What kind of creature chooses one person and refuses to leave? By sunset, Nora bolted herself inside the cabin, her husband's rifle propped against the doorframe out of habit. Through the window, she watched the foal lower itself onto the porch boards, legs folding beneath its body. It laid its head on its knees, but kept its eyes open, watching the door, watching for her. Something twisted in Nora's chest, something she'd kept locked down since the day she buried Isaac in frozen ground. She closed the curtain and turned away, but she could still feel those eyes on the other side of the wood. Waiting. Always waiting. 3 days passed and the foal never left. Nora woke each morning to find it in the exact same spot, eyes tracking her movements before she'd even finished dressing. Her own horses in the corral had started acting strange, pacing the fence line, tossing their heads at the unwelcome visitor who refused to take the hint. On the 4th morning, Nora saddled her mare and rode out to check the northern fence. She needed space from those watching eyes, needed to think. But when she reached the 1st mile marker, she heard labored breathing behind her. The foal had followed, legs trembling from exertion, sweat darkening its neck despite the cool September air. She stopped to repair a section of barbed wire that coyotes had pushed down. The foal stopped too, 30 feet back, sides pumping like bellows. Every time Nora moved to a new post, the foal adjusted its position, maintaining that precise distance. Not close enough to touch, but never far enough to lose sight of her. Silas Dunmore rode up from the southern trail, his weathered face splitting into a grin when he spotted the foal. "Got yourself a shadow, Mrs. Callahan." He spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Want me to run it off? Could put a bullet in it if you'd rather. Coyotes'll get it anyway, skinny as it is." The words came out sharper than Nora intended. "No." Silas raised his eyebrows, but didn't argue. He tipped his hat and rode on, leaving Nora alone with her strange companion. She couldn't explain why she'd refused. Couldn't explain why the thought of that foal disappearing made her chest feel hollow. That evening, she filled a bucket with water and set it on the edge of the porch. Told herself it was practical, nothing more. Wild Thing would move on once it got what it needed. By morning, the bucket sat empty, and the foal had moved closer. 6 feet from her door now, instead of 20. Close enough that she could count the burrs tangled in its mane. Close enough to see the way it held its front left leg, barely letting the hoof touch ground. Nora knelt on the porch, studying that leg from a distance. The foal didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched her with those dark, bottomless eyes. Above the hoof, she could see swelling, angry and hot, even from here. Infection, probably. The kind that killed if left untreated. She stood up, went inside, closed the door. But she didn't bolt it. Stood there with her hand on the wood, listening to the foal's ragged breathing on the other side. Isaac used to say she had a soft heart wrapped in barbed wire. He'd been wrong. Her heart wasn't soft anymore. 8 months of loneliness had hardened it into something she barely recognized. So why couldn't she walk away from this dying animal that had chosen her porch to haunt? The 5th morning brought silence. No huffing breath outside her door, no scrape of hooves on wood. Nora's eyes snapped open in the pre-dawn darkness, her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she didn't want to examine. She threw on Isaac's old coat and rushed, outside barefoot. The foal lay on its side near the porch steps, ribs rising and falling in shallow, irregular beats. Nora dropped to her knees beside it, her hands hovering over the small body, afraid to touch, afraid not to. Up close, the infected leg looked worse than she'd imagined. The gash above the hoof had split open, oozing yellow pus, the flesh around it swollen tight and radiating heat. The foal's eyes opened, finding hers immediately. In that gaze, Nora saw something that punched through every wall she'd built since Isaac's death. Not just pain, but a question. A plea so naked it hurt to witness. "Help me. Please. I came all this way, and you're all I have left." Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She went to the barn, grabbed old rope from Isaac's tack collection, fashioned a crude halter with fingers that remembered the knots, even when her brain felt numb. When she slipped it over the foal's head, the animal didn't fight. Didn't even try. Just let Nora help it stand, 3 legs wobbling, the 4th held completely off the ground now. They made it to the barn, one agonizing step at a time. Nora guided the foal into the empty stall that used to hold Isaac's gelding before she'd sold it for winter feed money. The foal collapsed onto fresh straw, chest heaving. Nora worked through the afternoon, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made the foal's whole body go rigid. She picked out embedded thorns, dirt, something that might have been a piece of bone from whatever had torn that leg open. The foal trembled, but held still, as if it understood that this pain was different from the pain of dying alone in the dirt. "Lost your mama, didn't you?" The words slipped out unbidden. Nora kept working, kept talking to fill the silence that usually ate her alive. "Me too, little one. Me too." Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, hot and relentless, the first she'd allowed since the February morning when Isaac stopped breathing and left her in a world that felt too big and too empty all at once. She pressed her forehead against the foal's neck, felt the rabbit-fast heartbeat under matted fur, and sobbed like something broken, finally letting itself shatter. The foal turned its head, rested its muzzle against Nora's shoulder, and they stayed like that as sunlight faded from the barn and darkness crept in to find them both still breathing. A week crawled by, and the foal's leg began to heal. Nora named her Ember for the reddish undertones that showed in her buckskin coat when sunlight hit it right. She mixed grain with molasses, watched Ember eat with an eagerness that suggested she'd been starving far longer than a few days. But the foal had a strange quirk. She wouldn't touch the food unless Nora stayed in the stall, wouldn't even lower her head to the bucket if Nora stepped outside. At night, Ember refused to sleep unless she could hear Nora's voice. Nora started bringing her mending into the barn office, talking about nothing and everything, while her needle worked through torn shirts and frayed rope. Ember would stand at the stall door, ears swiveling toward every word, eyes growing heavy only when Nora's voice filled the silence. Silas came by on the 8th day, leaned against the stall door, and watched Ember press against Nora's side like a dog instead of a wild horse. "That ain't natural," he said quietly. "Wild foals get weaned around 6 months, learn independence from their mama. This one acts like she'll die if you leave the room." "Maybe she would have," Nora said, running her hand down Ember's neck. "If she'd been alone much longer." Silas shook his head. "Wild horses don't act like this, Mrs. Callahan. Something broke in that animal before you found her." His words stayed with Nora after he left. That night, she dreamed of the daughter she'd lost 3 years back, the tiny girl who'd come too early and never drew breath. She'd buried her next to the creek, under the cottonwood where Isaac proposed. In the dream, the baby cried and cried, but Nora couldn't reach her, couldn't find her in the darkness no matter how hard she searched. She woke gasping, sweat soaking through her nightdress. When her vision cleared, she found Ember's head hanging over the stall door, watching the corner where Nora kept her bedroll in the office. How long had the foal been standing there? How many nights had those eyes watched Nora sleep? Understanding crept in like cold water rising. Ember wasn't just following her for food or shelter. The foal was terrified of being alone, of being left behind again. Whatever had happened before she showed up at Nora's fence had carved something out of her, left a wound deeper than the one in her leg. Nora climbed to her feet, walked to the stall, and wrapped her arms around Ember's neck. The foal leaned her full weight into Nora, trusting her to hold them both upright. Two broken things, learning to stand together in the dark. Neither one ready to name what they'd found in each other, but both knowing they couldn't survive losing it again. Nora saddled her mare before dawn, leaving Ember locked in the barn with enough feed to last the morning. The foal's panicked whinnies followed her down the trail, but Nora forced herself to keep riding. She needed answers about where Ember came from, why a wild foal would attach itself to a stranger with such desperate intensity. The canyon where the wild herd ranged opened up 2 miles north, red rock walls rising like broken teeth against the sky. Nora found the horses in the high meadow, 12 adults grazing alongside 4 foals who bucked and played in the morning light. But one mare stood apart from the group, head low, ribs showing through a dull bay coat. Nora dismounted slowly, approached on foot. The mare didn't run, didn't even lift her head. Up close, Nora could see dried milk stains on her flanks, her udder still swollen and heavy. This horse had recently lost a nursing foal. "Hoofbeats," announced another rider, before Nora could examine the mare further. Dutch Kearney pulled up on his roan gelding, his ranch bordering the canyon's western edge. "That mare's been like that since June," he called out. "Won't eat proper, won't rejoin the herd. Just stands there waiting to die, I reckon." Nora's throat tightened. "What happened in June?" "Mountain lion got her foal, found what was left of it near the ridge." Dutch spat into the dirt. "Nature's cruel that way. Mare can't seem to accept it, though. She's got milk fever from not nursing. Probably won't last the winter." "What did the foal look like?" Dutch squinted at her, puzzled by the question. "Buckskin filly. Had a crooked white blaze down her face. Why you asking?" The world tilted. Nora gripped her saddle to keep standing. Ember had a crooked blaze, the white stripe zigzagging from her forehead to her left nostril. "You're sure the foal died?" "Saw the body myself. Cat dragged it into the rocks. Didn't leave much." Dutch studied her face. "You find something, Mrs. Callahan?" But Nora was already mounting her horse, her mind racing through impossible timelines. The attack happened in June, nearly 3 months ago. Ember appeared at her fence just over a week back, starving and injured, but very much alive. She kicked her mare into a gallop, leaving Dutch's questions unanswered behind her. When she burst into the barn, Ember screamed and reared in her stall, hooves striking wood. Nora rushed to her, ran her hands over the foal's haunches, searching. There, under the matted fur, she found them. 4 parallel scars, healed over, but unmistakable. Claw marks. Ember hadn't lost her mother to a mountain lion. She'd survived one. Nora sat in the straw beside Ember, piecing together a story that made her chest ache. The mountain lion had attacked in June, killed one foal, but Ember had escaped with claw marks raked across her hindquarters. She'd survived, traumatized and injured, only to return to a mother who couldn't bear to look at her. The mare had lost one baby to those claws. Seeing Ember alive, marked by the same predator, must have shattered something in her mind. Grief didn't follow logic. It poisoned everything it touched, turned blessing into curse. The mare had rejected Ember, not out of cruelty, but out of pain too deep to carry. So Ember was driven from the herd, too young to survive alone. She would have spent weeks wandering the canyon, starving, that infected leg slowing her down, unable to understand why her mother wouldn't let her come home. Until finally, desperate and dying, she'd stumbled onto Nora's property and found a woman who looked just as lost as she felt. "You didn't follow me for food," Nora whispered, pressing her face into Ember's mane. "You followed me because I was the first thing you'd seen in months that wasn't trying to kill you or turn you away." Ember lowered her head into Nora's lap, a gesture of trust so complete it broke something open in Nora's chest. She thought about those first days, how she'd thrown rocks and cursed this foal for not leaving, for forcing her to care about something again. She'd been so angry at Ember for refusing to disappear, for making Nora feel responsible for another living thing when she could barely keep herself alive. But Ember hadn't needed someone strong. She'd needed someone who understood what it felt like to be abandoned by the world, to keep breathing even when everything hurt, to search for connection in a wilderness that only offered silence. Nora had spent 8 months since Isaac's death going through motions, checking fence lines and splitting wood, and pretending survival was the same thing as living. She'd convinced herself that grief was something you carried alone, that needing help was weakness, that asking to be seen was asking too much. Then this scrawny foal had shown up and refused to accept that answer. Had stood outside Nora's door for days, saying with her presence what Nora had been too afraid to admit out loud. I can't do this alone anymore. Please see me. Please choose me when everyone else has walked away. Nora wrapped both arms around Ember's neck and held on tight. I see you, she said into the warm fur. I see you, and I'm not going anywhere. For the first time since Isaac died, Nora felt something besides emptiness. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was hope. Nora made her decision that night, sitting in lamplight with Ember's head resting against her knee. She would keep this foal, train her properly, give her the life she'd been denied. But as days passed into weeks, Nora realized Ember was training her just as much. The foal forced Nora to wake with purpose instead of dread. Forced her to plan meals, to check the water trough, to notice when the stall needed fresh straw. Small tasks that required her to see beyond the next empty hour. Ember needed her, which meant Nora couldn't afford to stop moving, couldn't sink into the numbness that had been swallowing her whole since February. Silas noticed the change when he came by to help repair the barn roof. You seem less ghostly, he said, then looked embarrassed by his own honesty. Nora laughed, a sound that startled them both. Didn't know I looked like a ghost? Like you were halfway to joining your husband, if I'm being plain. Silas hammered another nail. That foal's been good for you. Maybe he was right. Nora found herself talking again. To Ember, mostly. Processing thoughts she'd kept locked behind her teeth for months. She told Ember about Isaac, about watching pneumonia fill his lungs with fluid, about holding his hand while he drowned on dry land, about the guilt she felt when it finally ended, when his struggling stopped and silence filled the room. Relief wasn't supposed to accompany death, but it had, and Nora had hated herself for feeling it. She told Ember about the daughter, too, about the tiny grave under the cottonwood, about how she'd wanted to die herself when the midwife wrapped that still body in linen. Isaac had held Nora for 3 days while she screamed herself raw, but they'd never spoken about it after. The grief lived in the spaces between their words, a third presence in their marriage that neither could name. One October morning, Ember nickered when Nora approached the barn, the first sound she'd made beyond frightened squeals when strangers came near. Nora stopped walking, tears blurring her vision. Such a small thing, that soft greeting, but it meant Ember felt safe enough to announce her presence instead of just waiting in silence to be noticed. Nora crossed the distance and wrapped her arms around Ember's neck, sobbing into her mane like she had that first day. But these tears felt different. Lighter, somehow. Ember leaned her full weight into Nora, balancing them both, and Nora understood they were holding each other up now. Two survivors learning that healing wasn't something you did alone in the dark. It was something you did together, one morning at a time, until the weight got easier to carry. Late September brought Dutch Kearney to Nora's door, just after sunset, his face grim in the fading light. Mountain lion's back, he said without preamble. Killed one of my calves last night, dragged it into the rocks. Sheriff's organizing a hunting party for dawn tomorrow. His eyes drifted to the corral, where Ember stood watching them, her coat gleaming copper in the last rays of sun. Shame to leave that foal out here, where the cat can get easy prey. Might want to keep her locked up tight. She'll be safe, Nora said, her hand instinctively moving to the rifle propped beside the door. Dutch tipped his hat and rode off, but his words circled in Nora's mind like vultures. The same mountain lion. It had to be. The one that had killed Ember's sibling and marked her with those scars. the one that had shattered her mother's spirit and driven Ember into the wilderness to die. That night, Nora brought Ember into the barn and bolted every door. She made a bedroll in the office, Isaac's old Winchester loaded and resting across her lap. Sleep came in fragments, broken by every creak of wood and rustle of wind. Around midnight, her horses exploded into chaos, screaming, hooves striking wood, the sound of bodies slamming against fence rails. Nora grabbed the rifle and lantern, her heart hammering as she ran outside. The horses churned in panicked circles, but it was the corral fence that stopped her cold. A massive tom cougar crouched on the top rail, muscles coiled, eyes reflecting green fire in her lamplight. Old scars crisscrossed its face and shoulders. This wasn't just any lion. This was a survivor too, marked by battles it had won. Ember stood frozen in the barn doorway behind Nora, every muscle locked rigid. The foal's eyes were fixed on the cat with recognition that went bone deep. She'd seen this predator before, felt its claws tear her flesh, watched it kill her sibling. The terror was written in every trembling line of her body. The lion's gaze shifted from the panicked horses to Ember. Its tail lashed once, twice. Nora understood with sick clarity that Dutch was wrong. This wasn't about easy prey. This cat had come specifically for the foal that had escaped it once before. Nora raised the rifle and fired into the air. The crack split the night, sent the horses into fresh hysteria. The lion launched itself backward off the fence, vanished into darkness like smoke. But Nora knew better than to feel relieved. Predators didn't give up. They waited. They circled. They came back when you let your guard down. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The hunting party arrived at dawn, 6 men on horseback with rifles and determination etched into their faces. Dutch and Silas led the group, along with the sheriff and 3 ranch hands Nora recognized from town. They planned to track the lion into the canyon, finish what should have been done months ago. Nora met them at her gate with Ember on a lead rope. "I'm coming with you." Dutch's eyebrows shot up. "Mrs. Callahan, this ain't work for—" "That cat's hunting her specifically." Nora cut him off, gesturing to Ember. "Only way to end this is to let it come." "You gone mad?" Dutch's voice rose. "You want to use that foal as bait?" "I want this finished." Nora swung into her saddle, Ember's rope tied secure to the horn. "That lion won't stop until one of them is dead. Better it happens on our terms." The men exchanged glances but didn't argue further. They rode into the canyon as morning light painted the red rocks gold and amber. The terrain narrowed as they climbed, walls pressing close on either side until they reached a rocky outcrop that overlooked a small clearing. Nora dismounted, led Ember down into the open space below while the men positioned themselves in the rocks above. She tied the foal to a sturdy juniper, though her hands shook doing it. Ember's eyes were white-rimmed with fear, her whole body trembling. "I'm right here," Nora whispered, pressing her forehead to Ember's neck. "I won't let anything happen to you." She climbed back to her position, rifle ready, and they waited. An hour passed in silence, broken only by bird calls and wind through stone. Then Ember's ears pinned flat against her skull, her body going rigid as she stared at the southern slope. The mountain lion emerged from scrub oak like a ghost taking shape, massive and scarred, favoring its back left leg. An old injury, Nora realized. This cat was hunting Ember not out of malice, but necessity. It was wounded, probably couldn't take down healthy adult prey anymore. It needed something young, something it had already marked as vulnerable. Nora sighted down her rifle barrel, finger on the trigger. Perfect shot. The cat moved toward Ember in a low crouch, unaware of the guns trained on it from above. All Nora had to do was squeeze, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. She saw herself in that limping predator, another creature doing whatever it took to survive in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. Another survivor covered in scars, hunting for something to fill the emptiness inside. Her finger loosened on the trigger. In that moment of hesitation, everything went to hell. Silas saw Nora's hesitation and raised his own rifle. Nora screamed, "Wait!" But the cat lunged in that same breath, closing the distance to Ember in 3 powerful bounds. Dutch fired, the shot cracking off stone as the bullet went wide. Ember reared hard enough to snap the rope, hooves striking air as she bolted straight toward the rocks where Nora crouched. The lion pursued, closing ground fast despite its limp. Then the bay mare exploded from the tree line like thunder given form, placing herself between the cat and Ember with a scream that made Nora's blood run cold. The mother, following some instinct deeper than grief, defending the daughter she'd rejected. The mare struck with her front hooves, a weapon more deadly than any rifle at close range. The cat twisted away from the first blow, reassessed the situation with predator calculation. One vulnerable foal was easy prey. 2 full-grown horses were a different equation entirely. It backed toward the scrub, eyes still locked on Ember, then melted into shadow and disappeared. Nora scrambled down from the rocks, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. Ember stood trembling, sides heaving, but alive and whole. The bay mare positioned herself between Ember and the direction the cat had vanished, nostrils flared, ready to fight again if needed. For a long moment, mother and daughter stared at each other across 3 feet of rocky ground. Nora held her breath, watching something shift in the mare's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or release. The mare stepped forward slowly, stretched her neck out, and touched her muzzle to Ember's forehead. A gesture so gentle it made Nora's throat close up. But Ember didn't move toward her mother. She pressed against Nora instead, choosing the woman who'd cleaned her wounds and held her through nightmares over the mare who'd given birth to her. The bay mare watched this for a heartbeat longer. Then something in her posture changed. Her head came up, the haunted look draining from her eyes like poison finally lanced from a wound. She'd come to save her daughter. That was enough. She turned and walked back toward the canyon, and Nora could see the difference in how she moved. Lighter. Unburdened. In the distance, the wild herd appeared, and this time the mare rejoined them, her place in the world remembered. Silas came up beside Nora, rested a hand on her shoulder. That foal chose you twice now. Once at your fence, once right here. Nora's vision blurred as she stroked Ember's neck. She didn't choose me. We chose each other. They rode home in silence, Ember walking freely beside Nora's mare, no rope needed. That night, Nora sat at Isaac's old desk and pulled out paper she hadn't touched in months. Her hand shook as she wrote the first line to his sister back east. "I'm still here, and I think I'm going to be okay." Through the window, she watched Ember sleeping in the moonlit corral, finally peaceful. 2 orphans who'd found each other in the wilderness when they both needed saving. Both learning that survival wasn't the same as living, that healing required letting someone see your wounds, that sometimes being chosen by someone who needs you is what makes you whole again. Nora pressed her hand against the cold glass and smiled for the first time in 8 months. The weight was still there, the grief and loss and scars that would never fully fade. But now she had a reason to carry it. Now she wasn't alone. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel because we have more incredible true stories coming your way that'll touch your heart and remind you why connection matters. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we have lined up next.